Hi, welcome to this channel on magnetic energy, technology, principles, applications. This video is about magnetic string theory. This is highly unconventional information. So I get these questions occasionally. Does this magnetic model have any parallels to string theory? And so I thought it'd be appropriate to do a video on this. The parallels are very loose at best, but I still think it's insightful as to this model. And so now, of course, like I've said before, this information comes from, there are three things primarily. So it comes from experimental data, it comes from theoretical data, and it comes from revelatory data. Now that is the holy trinity for top secret research. And so most researchers in this field and in top secret labs, they follow those three things: the theoretical, the experimental, and the revelatory. Now, the funny thing is there's a lot of scientists in the conventional world that will follow the same three things, but they will never admit to the revelatory part of it, because obviously they would be ostracized if they did that. So in the string theory, you would take, for example, like the idea of like the strings and the sheets, and you would convert that to take your string and convert it to a vortex. And that's not that hard to imagine making that conversion. So you can do that. Now the sheets, so take the sheets and convert that to like a dimensional membrane. So this is kind of where the magnetic model really comes into play. You've got to have multi-dimensions in order for the model to work, multiple dimensions, and really multiple dimensions just to make our existence functional, to make our reality functional in this model. So then we'll jump into the subatomic stuff really fast. So the whole idea of like the fermions and the bosons and the quarks and the leptons and all that, take all that, that's just barely scratching the surface of the subatomic world in the magnetic model. So you've got to think about, in terms of this model, no matter how deep it's required to go, and it's a lot of it's based on demand, that you will have like subatomic structures and energetic structures that can branch off into near infinity. So I mean, they could have millions, billions, trillions of branches depending on the complexity of the situation that they're exposed to. So you could even have a supercomputer that's generating like demand, and it could go off into God knows how high of a number, and it won't matter. The subatomic structures will always match it. So they'll either branch off and they'll go deeper and deeper and deeper. This is one of the fundamental reasons you cannot have a fundamental particle in this model. You can't have something solid that is the foundation of everything, because everything has to be energetic structures that can go deeper and deeper and deeper and deeper into infinity to account for all the encoding, or if you want to say the subatomic encoding, or the branches that give everything variations. Now I'll come back to this in a minute and explain why this is incredibly important for the functioning of our universe, to have it be this way. So in this model, of course, there are multiple dimensions. Now with each dimension, there's something they call it a feeder dimension. And so the feeder dimension is almost like a piggyback dimension that goes with each dimension. Now the feeder dimension, you could say that's kind of like, people might call it like the 0 point field, or like we would call it like the etheric magnetic field. The feeder dimension is intimately connected to our dimension. So you could say almost all phenomena that take place in our dimension are either like connected not only to the feeder dimension, but they could be like a manifestation of it. They could be like the etheric model, like it's all interconnected. So every single energetic reaction, all the physical things, everything that happens in terms of gravity and light, and like all the strong forces and weak forces, they're all manifestations that come from the feeder dimension into this dimension. So it's a dimension that's extremely active, it's extremely dynamic, it's constantly being flooded with energy, and it's constantly distributing energy to our dimension at all times, like 24/7. The rate of the extraction or the exchange from that dimension varies with each like system and the demand for it. So the rate can be extremely fast or extremely high, or it can mellow out to like if you're like in space, for example. So the rate is going to vary, the intensity is going to vary, but it's always very dynamic. So that etheric magnetic realm feeding into this realm at subatomic levels. Now, through a vortice, so this is where the whole magic of this model comes into play. So you've got this idea of all the subatomic structures are vortices of some sort, okay? So the feeder dimension there's an attraction through the feeder dimension. We're immersed in it. We're completely immersed in the feeder dimension at all times in our dimension, as well as every other dimension goes through this as well. So when you think about a vortice from the feeder dimension connecting into our dimension, there's always the membrane, there's always the barrier, if you want to say. People call it the dimensional membrane. And on a lot of models, like electric universe models and different things, will say there's a dielectric membrane, and that's fine. You can call it a dielectric membrane. The thing is, in this model, anything that we measure electrically is a byproduct of a much more powerful magnetic etheric neutron ion process. Okay, so there's a much more powerful process, and the measurement of anything electrical is typically a byproduct of that. Now, in this model, and this is hugely important, so you could call it a dielectric membrane, but you could also say the important part of this is whatever you want to call that membrane, it produces a gap. So there has to be a gap between the feeder dimension and our reality, our dimension. That gap is hugely important because in the feeder dimension, everything is predominantly neutral, although it's encoded to a nearly infinite level. But then as it's feeding to the subatomic structures in this level, everything has to jump a gap so that it can convert to the necessary polarities in our dimension to manifest everything that we need to live, and all the forces and all the matter and everything we call matter in this dimension have to be transferred from the feeder dimension through a gap. This is massively important. So now when you move into like super asymmetry or supersymmetry, this model really requires both of them. And so here's the quote, and then I'll explain it. The reconciliation of the asymmetrical subatomic fields creates symmetry between the dimensions. Okay, so what it's saying is there's always going to be asymmetrical relationships between the feeder dimension and our reality at the subatomic level in our dimension. That asymmetrical relationships are, I mean, there's an untold number of these relationships happening in every second. The asymmetrical relationship creates the attract, it creates the pressure, it creates everything that we need to move energy from the feeder dimension into our dimension at all times at the subatomic level. But so that asymmetrical relationship ultimately creates the symmetry between the dimensions, which is massively important. So that, like we were told over and over, the universe functions at 100% efficiency at all times, especially when it comes like between dimensional exchange. And so that's really important. No matter what's happening, the distribution and redistribution process always are 100% efficient. And so the asymmetry creates the symmetry between dimensions, and that's really the critical thing of this. So now when you think about in terms of all of the forces, so like the gravitational force and like the magnetic force, the electromagnetic forces, the strong force, the weak force, and all these things, think about the feeder dimension is constantly being drawn into the subatomic structures of our dimension, and there's no limit to how deep they can go. And this is why, like, if you want to like identify a graviton, for example, or a photon, we will always say, depending on the situation, those gravitons will have variations of their subatomic structures that go infinitely deep. This is really important because in every planet, in every star, in every galactic situation, the expression of a gravitational circuit, or the expression of the gravitron, if you want to call it that, or the graviton, however you want to say it, there will always be variations in it. And that's so important because if there weren't variations in it, the universe couldn't function effectively without collapsing. Okay, you can't have all gravity pulling in on itself. That's why gravity can never simply be a function of mass. It's impossible. You have to have encoded subatomic particles for all of those different gravitational fields so that they only interact with each other to a certain degree. It's all about degrees, and that's really hugely important. So the manifestation from the feeder dimension to our dimension, our reality, whether it's in the electromagnetic forces, the gravity forces, whether it's in light or whatever it is, that when those feeder dimension, like relatively neutral energetic structures are converting through vortices, and they jump that gap into our dimension, and they do it constantly all the time, whenever they jump that gap, that's when the conversion process takes place, and they become whatever they're attracted to in our dimension, as a manifestation of gravity, as a manifestation of light, as a manifestation of whatever it is, whatever force is happening. And then, of course, in all of the matter or the energetic structures that compose our universe, they all convert to that. So this is why it's like unified, you can have a unified field theory or unified forces out of this model, because it's the conversion of all of that to these different structures with the depth of encoding that is necessary in any given situation to manifest in a reality. And so that, now you can see in this model, the quantum part of this is really, really beautifully spelled out, and it's beautifully manifested. So there's a consciousness that's at every level of this process. So the feeder dimension, the subatomic components, the conversion of that, the conversion through the vortices and through the gap jumping and everything, there's consciousness at every single part of the process. Now, what does that mean? That means that in the feeder dimension, everything is in this state of flux. It's in this state of potential that's constantly being drawn, and it's constantly being resupplied by universal attract forces. So you have the ability, we have the ability, depending on our level of consciousness, to influence the influx of that energy at every level. What does that mean? That means beings, including us, but we'll get better and better at it with a little bit of ascension, because it gives us power in our consciousness. Beings can affect gravity. They can affect light. They can affect the electromagnetic forces. They can affect whatever you want to say, the manifestation of elements, the manifestation of matter in our reality, can all be impacted, changed, and affected by consciousness, and that includes time. So in the feeder dimension, along with all the other feeder dimensions that are tacked on to all the other dimensions, time is irrelevant. So events can take place at any given moment from the feeder dimension feeding in. So as the energy jumps the gap into our dimension, it's automatically syncing up with the resonance and the resonance factors of our dimension, and everything that creates the illusion, if you want to call it the illusion of linear events, the illusion of time. And so it's hugely important, because consciousness can change that. So consciousness can speed up time. It can slow down time. It can allow you to jump to other moments of time. It's not really it's about the events. It's about event sequencing. We can change the rate of event sequencing with our consciousness. And then we can experience other portions or other moments of time, what that we call time, through our consciousness. As we become more powerful in our conscious energy field, all of those abilities come online. And we get the understanding that as the energy feeds into our dimension, we have the ability to change it. We have the ability to influence it. We have the ability for spontaneous creation in this physical reality, because we can change with our consciousness the energy flowing through to us and our dimension from the feeder dimension, if that makes sense. That's how we can achieve spontaneous healing. That's how we can achieve spontaneous ascension. That's how we can change our abilities and like do things like levitation and everything, because we will change the incoming energy from the feeder dimension spontaneously with our consciousness as it manifests in our reality. So it's hugely important. This is how quantum mechanics and quantum physics really it blends perfectly with the magnetic model, because everything is there. Time doesn't exist at that feeder dimension, and we control how it manifests in our reality as we get more and more evolved in our consciousness. So you can kind of see there's some parallels and some overlap of this. Please send in any questions that you have with this, and hopefully I got enough said this and it wasn't too confusing. I might have to do a follow-up video on it. We'll see. But I thank you guys, and we'll see you again next time.